All right, so are you like me and fascinated by the whole Loch Ness Monster thing? Do you ever wonder if there's any truth to the legend?
Well, if so, you've come to the right place.
That's right. Today we are diving deep into Loch Ness to see if Nessie is real or just a very elaborate myth.
Yeah, Loch Ness, that massive lake up in the Scottish Highlands.
Yep, exactly right.
It's got a really long history of these supposed monster sightings going all the way back to, 565 AD.
I know. That is crazy.
It's wild. We've got, centuries of stories, blurry photos, sonar readings. It's no wonder why Nessie has, captured the world's imagination.
For sure, absolutely. So we've got a whole stack of YouTube videos, scientific articles to unpack, so let's just jump right in.
Yeah, let's get to it.
So we're going to examine the latest evidence, the history, what science has to say, and maybe we'll finally have an answer to that age-old question. Is Nessie real?
Or yeah, is it just a bunch of hoaxes and misinterpretations?
Right, exactly.
You know what's really got people talking lately? These recent sonar images from 2024.
Oh yeah, tell me about those.
There's one that appears to show this long serpentine shape. And then there's another one that just shows a smaller blip.
Uh-huh.
So naturally, this has everyone thinking, oh my gosh, could this be our first real glimpse of Nessie?
Yeah, of course. I have to admit, those pictures, they're pretty captivating. And what makes it even more interesting is that the sonar image with that long shape, it was captured by Sean Sloy. He's a really experienced Loch Ness boat skipper.
Yeah.
He was pretty convinced by what he saw.
I mean, and to add to that, the sonar manufacturer even confirmed the reading as an animate object.
Yeah, I remember reading about that.
You can see why people are getting excited.
Totally, yeah. Okay, but here's where things get a little, complicated. So while the sonar manufacturer, they did verify that animate object reading, the skipper, he admitted that, he isn't a sonar expert and he couldn't be certain about the object's, actual size.
Right. Yeah, that's a really key point, right?
Yeah.
Without knowing the scale of whatever this object is, it's really hard to know if we're looking at, something truly massive. Or maybe it's something much smaller that just looks big in the sonar image.
Right, exactly. It's hard to tell. And remember that model of Nessie? The one that they used in that 1970s film, The Private Life of Sherlock Holmes?
Oh, yeah.
It turns out that it sank during filming.
Oh, wow.
And it was only rediscovered in 2016, so.
I mean, that makes you wonder if the sonar is just picking up on, old movie props, right?
Yeah, exactly. It really makes you think.
And it just highlights, how tricky it can be to really interpret sonar images, especially in a place like Loch Ness that's had all these film productions.
Totally, yeah. And speaking of tricky interpretations, there is a lot of skepticism around these 2024 sonar images. Do you remember that YouTube video we were talking about? The 2024 proof of the Loch Ness Monster? There's this Reddit user. They seem to know, a thing or two about sonar.
Yeah.
And they really kind of picked apart those images in the comments.
Oh, really? Interesting. What did they say?
Yeah, I mean, they had some, pretty interesting points. First of all, they point out that the images are missing, a data scale, so we can't really be sure how big the objects actually are. Plus, both of the sonar scans were taken when the boat was going faster than the, recommended speed for accurate readings.
Oh.
And then they also pointed out that the sonar data compilation, it's not like a live feed.
Uh-huh.
So the object could look stretched or distorted just because of the way, the data was processed.
Oh, so it might not even be a real representation of what's there.
Exactly.
Uh-huh.
And then to make things even more interesting, they brought up the skipper's livelihood. The skipper, his income depends on tourism. So is there a chance, even if it's subconscious, right, that he might be inclined to hype up any potential sightings, because more tourists would mean more business for him?
Yeah, I mean, it's something to consider. It's it could be conflict of interest, potentially.
Right. And the Reddit user even suggested a more cynical headline. They said, Loch Ness skipper has wildly inaccurate understanding of the term proof.
Oh, my gosh.
Ouch, right.
That's kind of harsh, but I see their point.
Yeah, I mean, I thought it was a good point. It just, reminds us to be careful about jumping to conclusions, especially when somebody might have a vested interest in a particular outcome.
Right. It's like that classic magician's trick.
Yeah.
Misdirection, right?
Yes.
We're so focused on this idea of a monster
Yeah.
that we might miss other explanations.
Right.
Like, I don't know, maybe it's boat wakes or submerged logs or something.
Right, like just completely mundane explanations.
Yeah.
And, that reminds me of that famous surgeon's photograph from 1933.
Oh, yeah. The classic one. Yeah.
Yeah, it shows what looks like this long neck emerging from the water.
Right.
And it became like the quintessential Nessie photo.
Yeah.
And it just like fueled this huge media frenzy.
And it's like the perfect example of how just one seemingly convincing image can just capture the public's imagination. And then, like, it creates this myth that lasts for decades.
Totally, yeah. And it took a while, but it was finally revealed in 1994 that the surgeon's photo was actually a hoax.
Oh, wow.
And it turned out to be a toy submarine with a fake head and neck.
Oh, my God.
It's just incredible how, like, a simple trick could fool so many people for so long.
I know, it's wild. And that's not the only hoax.
Right.
Like, what about those infamous footprints on the shore of Loch Ness?
Yeah.
It turned out they were made with a hippopotamus foot ashtray.
Oh, my God. That is amazing.
Crazy, right? It's just like...
So funny. It seems like there's a long history of people, like, really trying to, pull the wool over our eyes when it comes to Nessie.
Oh, yeah, for sure. But, alongside all the hoaxes, there have also been these really genuine scientific attempts to try to find the creature.
Oh, right. Tell me more about that.
So, like, back in the 1960s and 1970s, there were a bunch of sonar expeditions that did pick up on some unexplained objects in the loch.
Interesting.
But, nothing that they could definitively say was Nessie.
Right, yeah.
And then there was Operation Deep Scan in 1987, which was like the largest sonar sweep of Loch Ness that had ever been done. And there was a lot of excitement initially about this large object that they detected.
Oh, yeah.
But, it turned out to just be a pile of debris.
Oh, of course.
And then they even explored this area they called Nessie's Lair, this deep spot that they found in 1989.
Uh-huh.
But, they finally got an underwater camera down there. It was just a flat surface, no lair to be found.
Oh, my gosh. That's hilarious.
So, yeah.
Yeah.
It seems like finding real evidence of Nessie is a lot harder than just pointing some fancy sonar at the water.
Yeah, it sounds like it.
You're telling me. And, when you look at the science behind why Nessie as, like, a plesiosaur is just super unlikely,
Yeah.
it becomes even more clear that we're probably not dealing with a prehistoric monster here.
Right. Okay. So let's break down the science a little bit. So first of all, Loch Ness was frozen solid during the last ice age. It's really hard to imagine, like, a plesiosaur surviving that.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's just not biologically possible. And, the lake's ecosystem just doesn't have enough food to support a large breeding population of, these massive creatures.
Right. There's just not enough to go around.
Exactly. And plus, think about it, plesiosaurs, they needed to breathe air. They would have to surface pretty regularly. And in a lake that's, like, constantly being watched by, tourists and all these researchers, you'd think that somebody would spotted it by now.
Right. If they were out there, we'd probably have some amazing photos and videos.
I mean, I think so. And, that lack of photographic evidence, like clear photographic or video evidence, that really weakens the whole plesiosaur theory.
Right. Especially since people are always looking at Loch Ness, like, constantly.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, so if it's not a plesiosaur, how about the theory that Nessie is a sea creature that, like, wandered in from the ocean?
That's a really popular one. But when you really scrutinize it, it doesn't quite hold up.
Right.
So scientists have, like, analyzed the sediment at the bottom of Loch Ness, and there's no evidence of salt water getting in there since the last ice age.
Interesting. So Nessie couldn't have come in from the sea anytime recently, but what if it got trapped in Loch Ness after the last ice age when it was connected to the ocean?
I mean, people have definitely proposed that theory as well. But there's a problem with that, too, because the river Ness, which is what connects Loch Ness to the sea, it's way too shallow and narrow for, like, a big marine animal to travel through.
Oh, okay. So that kind of rules that out, too. So we've ruled out a plesiosaur. We've ruled out a sea creature. It seems like we're hitting a dead end here.
Not necessarily. There are actually some other explanations for the Nessie sightings.
Okay, I'm all ears.
And they're a bit more plausible.
Okay.
And they don't require, a mythical monster.
All right, tell me more about these. What are these alternative explanations?
So one explanation involves this thing called a seiche. Have you heard of that?
No, what is
It's
it?
this unique kind of underwater wave. And it can happen in, like, enclosed bodies of water like Loch Ness.
Interesting. So how could a wave be mistaken for a monster?
So seiches, they can be really powerful,
Uh-huh.
like strong enough to carry logs and debris and even like big masses of seaweed along the surface of the loch.
Huh.
And the really interesting thing is that these objects, they could appear to be moving against the wind.
Oh, wow.
So it kind of creates the illusion of like a creature swimming.
Interesting. So what looks like a monster could just be a log riding a wave. That's kind of clever. I like that.
It is.
Yeah?
It is pretty clever. And it's not just logs either. Boat wakes, especially if it's like really calm conditions.
Yeah.
They can stick around on Loch Ness for hours. They can create these like long patterns on the surface that could like pretty easily be mistaken for, something moving through the water,
Right.
a creature.
Totally.
And then, of course, we can't forget about birds.
Oh, and the birds, yeah.
Especially like long-necked diving birds, like cormorants. I mean, those things, they can look a lot like a monster from far away.
Right. Or if the lighting's not great.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. So birds, they're a really common culprit in like a lot of the Nessie sightings.
Right. And then I guess there's always the possibility that some of these sightings, they could just be attributed to like big fish.
Yeah, for sure.
Like, I don't know, like the Baltic sturgeon.
Yeah.
Which can grow pretty big.
Yeah, those can get huge.
Yeah. So, I mean, are there any other explanations that we haven't, like, talked about yet?
Well, there's one theory it's a little bit out there.
Okay.
But I think it's worth mentioning.
Okay, tell me.
So there's this geologist named Dr. Luigi Picardi, and he has suggested that earthquakes could actually be behind some of the historical Nessie sightings.
Huh.
So his idea is that even like minor seismic activity could create these disturbances in the water, and it leads to these weird ripples or waves. And those could be mistaken for a monster.
Okay, so it's like the ripples from the earthquake
Exactly.
are mistaken for Nessie. Okay, so that is kind of a wild theory.
It is. But, I do think it's kind of cool.
Yeah, it is interesting. But wouldn't we know if there were earthquakes happening in Loch Ness?
Well, seismologists have kind of pointed out that the seismic activity in the Loch Ness area is actually pretty low.
Right.
So while it's an interesting idea, it doesn't really have much backing from a scientific standpoint.
So it's kind of unlikely.
Yeah.
Okay. So it seems like we have a lot of pretty plausible explanations, but no definitive answers, right?
Yeah, it's like we're putting together a puzzle, but we're still missing some of the pieces.
Exactly. Yeah. I like that analogy.
And when it comes to the Loch Ness Monster, there's this whole other piece of the puzzle we need to think about. Human perception.
Right. Yeah. Like how our minds can play tricks on us, especially when it comes to something as mysterious as Nessie.
Exactly. And, we often see what we want to see or what we expect to see, especially in a place like Loch Ness, which is just so full of, legends and folklore.
Right. It's like that old saying, we see what we want to see.
Precisely.
So how does psychology actually play into these Nessie sightings?
Okay, well, so think about it. Loch Ness, it's dark, it's deep.
Uh-huh.
It creates this, like, environment that's perfect for misinterpretations.
Yeah.
It's just really hard to, like, accurately judge size and distance in those conditions.
Right.
Especially when you think about things like fog and mist and the light changing.
Right.
So what might seem like, a monster could actually just be a wave or a rock formation.
Mm-hmm. Right, yeah.
Or even, like, a group of birds swimming together.
Right.
It's easy to get things mixed up.
I can definitely see that. And then there's also like the power of suggestion, right? If you're already expecting to see a monster, your brain might just like interpret any weird shape or movement as Nessie.
Exactly. It's like a self-fulfilling prophecy almost.
Yeah.
You go in looking for a monster, you're going to find a monster.
Right. I was reading about this experiment, and I don't know if this is true or not, but they were showing people like blurry pictures of shapes in the water.
Oh, wow.
And the people who believed in the Loch Ness Monster, they were way more likely to identify those like random shapes as Nessie.
That is fascinating. It really shows how powerful our expectations can be.
Yeah.
Especially when we're dealing with something as mythical as the Loch Ness Monster.
Totally. And it's like our brains are filling in the blanks, right? With what we want to see, even if it's not actually there.
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. And that's where this concept of pareidolia comes in.
Okay, tell me about pareidolia. What is that?
It's this really cool thing. It's our brain's natural tendency to, like, perceive meaningful patterns in random or vague information. So it's why we see faces in clouds.
Yeah, okay.
Or
yeah.
why we see, like, animals in random patterns.
Right, right. Yeah, so, like, pareidolia could be why someone sees Nessie in, like, a blurry photo.
Exactly.
Even if it's just, like, a log.
Yeah. Their brain is just trying to make sense of the picture.
Yeah.
And it sees a monster because that's what it wants to see.
Right. I mean, it's amazing how much our brain, like, influences what we see.
I know, it's incredible. Pareidolia, it's actually a totally normal thing,
Mm.
but it can lead to, misunderstandings.
Right.
Especially in a place like Loch Ness where everyone's already expecting to see a monster.
Right. It's almost like it makes it harder to see what's actually there.
Yeah, I think so.
Interesting. So are we basically saying that all Nessie sightings are just, like, cases of mistaken identity? Is all just in our heads?
Well, it's not that simple. Well, a lot of the sightings can be explained by, people misidentify things or environmental factors and those psychological things we were talking about.
Mm-hmm.
There are still some things about Loch Ness that just haven't been explained.
Interesting. Okay, so what kind of things?
Well, like those sonar readings we talked about,
Mm-hmm.
the ones that couldn't be explained by, like, boat wakes or debris.
Right. Yeah.
There are a whole bunch of those that have, like, stumped researchers for years. And then, you think about all the historical accounts of these, like, weird sightings in Loch Ness,
Uh-huh.
some of them going back centuries.
Yeah.
And while, some of those accounts may be, like, exaggerated or,
Yeah.
embellished over time, it's really hard to dismiss all of them as, like, just pure lies.
Right.
So there's definitely still some mystery there.
It's like we're trying to solve this huge puzzle,
Yeah.
but some of the pieces are just missing.
I love that analogy.
And each new piece of information we get, whether it's a sonar reading or a historical account or even, a new scientific study,
Right.
it just adds like another layer to the whole puzzle.
Yeah.
And I think it really helps us understand just how complex Loch Ness is
Uh-huh.
and also the power behind, the monster myth.
Yeah, for sure.
So even with all of the scientific stuff we have, all the research that's been done, there's still like a big element of wonder and mystery around Loch Ness.
Oh, absolutely. And I think that sense of wonder is part of what keeps people coming back to this lake,
Right.
year after year, because, we're drawn to the possibility of something unknown. The idea that there might be something extraordinary out there
Yeah.
just hiding,
Yeah.
just beyond our understanding.
Right. I think that's a really good point. It's like a reminder that even in our, modern world, there are still things we don't know.
Oh, yeah, tons.
And there are still places on the map, like literally, that are not fully figured out.
Yeah. There are still frontiers to explore. I love that, And who knows, maybe one day we'll finally figure out the truth behind the Loch Ness Monster. But until then, the search itself, it's part of the adventure.
Yeah. It's about, embracing the mystery, respecting the history,
Yeah.
and always asking questions.
Yeah, I love that.
Because, those are the things that keep us curious and interested.
I think you're right. And that's what makes the Loch Ness Monster such a fascinating topic, right?
Mm.
It encourages us to think, like, critically, to question things, and to be open to the possibility that there's just, like, more to the world than we can see.
Yeah, absolutely. And in a world where, things often feel like too certain, too, already figured out,
Yeah,
I think that's a really valuable perspective to have.
I totally agree. So as we continue to, like, explore this legend, let's just remember to, like, keep an open mind, embrace the mystery, and just, like, enjoy the journey,
Yeah, I love that. Well said. Now let's change gears for a minute and talk about the cultural impact of the Loch Ness Monster, because Nessie isn't just a creature, right? It's this global icon.
That's so true. It's gone way beyond just, like, local legend. It's become this global phenomenon. It's this symbol of mystery and adventure and how powerful these old stories can be.
Yeah, and it's had this huge impact on the local economy, right?
Yeah, for sure.
Tourism in the Loch Ness region is like booming thanks to Nessie.
I mean, people come from all over the world just hoping to catch a glimpse of it.
I know. It's amazing how one legend can really shape, a whole region. Nessie has become like synonymous with Loch Ness. And, that image of the monster is everywhere. It's on postcards, souvenirs, even like the businesses.
It's true.
It's the unofficial mascot of Loch Ness. And, the cultural influence, it goes way beyond tourism. Nessie has inspired so many works of art and literature and music and film.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Like you've got everything, the classic films like The Private Life of Sherlock Holmes to documentaries, books, even video games.
Yeah.
It's crazy.
It's amazing how this one legend has had such a huge impact on like all these different parts of culture.
Yeah.
And it just shows how powerful stories are,
Yeah.
Especially ones that like tap into our fascination with the unknown.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And, the Loch Ness Monster, it's a reminder that stories have this power to bring us together, to inspire us, to connect us to something bigger than ourselves.
Yeah.
I think there's something really beautiful about that.
Yeah, definitely. And as we, continue to kind of explore, the depths of Loch Ness, both literally and figuratively,
Right.
It's really important to think about how important this legend is culturally, right?
Absolutely.
It's this story that has just, captivated the entire world. And, it's probably going to keep having an impact for many years to come.
Oh, for sure. I don't think Nessie's going anywhere anytime soon.
Yeah, it's a story that's here to stay.
Absolutely.
So welcome back to our deep dive into the mystery of the Loch Ness Monster. We've been talking about all sorts of things. Sonar images, those historical accounts, even, the hoaxes that have popped up over the years.
Yeah.
But there's this one question that we haven't really answered yet. If Nessie isn't this, like, ancient plesiosaur, what could it actually be?
Right. It's like that whole idea is like so popular, Nessie as a plesiosaur.
Yeah.
It's everywhere in pop culture.
Yeah.
But like when you actually look at the science, it's a pretty big stretch. I mean, the idea that these like ancient reptiles could have just like lived for millions of years.
Right.
In a lake that's like relatively young, like Loch Ness, it just doesn't really make sense.
Yeah. And the timeline, it doesn't work. I mean, Loch Ness was formed like 10,000 years ago from glaciers.
Right.
But plesiosaurs died out with the dinosaurs like 66 million years ago. That's a big difference.
It's a huge gap.
Yeah.
Yeah. And even if we like pretended for a second that somehow some plesiosaurs did, survive, Loch Ness would have been a pretty rough place to live during the last ice age.
Oh, yeah, that's right.
It was completely frozen over.
Yeah, it ended about like 11,000 years ago. So
That's a good point. It's hard to imagine anything surviving in those kinds of conditions.
right. Let alone a plesiosaur.
Yeah.
It's really unlikely. And then you have to think about the food chain too, Loch Ness just doesn't have enough food to support a bunch of big predators, like, a whole group of plesiosaurs.
So even if like one plesiosaur somehow made it through the ice age, it would basically be like starving.
Basically, yeah, just wouldn't have enough to eat.
That's a good point.
And, we can't forget plesiosaurs, they had to breathe air.
Right.
They'd be coming up to the surface all the time.
Yeah.
And with all the people watching Loch Ness.
Right. All the tourists, all the researchers.
Exactly. You'd think someone would have a clear picture by now. Right. I mean, we should have some amazing photos and videos at this point.
Right. I mean, and that lack of evidence, like, that really casts doubt on the whole plesiosaur thing.
So, okay, if it's not a plesiosaur, what about the theory that it's like a giant eel? I feel like that's been like getting more popular.
It has, especially after that DNA study they did back in 2019. They found a ton of eel DNA in Loch Ness. But hold on, before we get too excited.
Okay.
Eels, they're pretty common in freshwater lakes. So the study just confirmed that eels live in Loch Ness. It doesn't actually say anything about giant eels.
So it's like we have a clue, but we're still missing like most of the pieces.
Yeah, exactly. It's interesting, but it's not like proof. And, a giant eel is definitely more realistic than a prehistoric monster, but we still don't have any actual evidence. We've never seen a giant eel in Loch Ness.
Right.
And there's no reason why they would get to be like monster sized in that environment.
So it's like we're chasing these shadows, always looking for clues, but never actually finding, what we're looking for.
Yeah. And I think that's like part of why people are still so interested in the Loch Ness Monster. It's like this story that makes us think about all the things we don't know. It allows us to think about those things that are like beyond our understanding, maybe even a little scary.
Right. It's that mystery.
Yeah, exactly. And it reminds us that even now, with all the science we have, there are still some mysteries that science can't fully explain.
And that's a cool thing to think about. It's like there's still so much wonder in the world.
Exactly. But I do think as we're, looking into the science and the history, we also have to think about how people misidentify things and how our own minds can play tricks on us.
Right.
A lot of these Nessie sightings, they can actually be explained by things that are, pretty ordinary.
Right, like those boat wakes.
Yeah.
They really stick around on the loch. And it would be so easy to think it was a creature swimming.
Totally. And the weather plays a big role, too.
Mm.
Loch Ness is often foggy, or misty.
Mm.
And when you can't see well, it's hard to tell how big something is or how far away it is. So, like, what you think is this huge hump might just be a wave or some rocks or even, like, a bunch of birds swimming in a line.
It's crazy how easy it is to trick our brains, especially when we're expecting to see something specific. I remember reading about this study. They showed people these blurry pictures of shapes in water. And the people who believed in the Loch Ness Monster, they were way more likely to say that the shapes were Nessie.
That's so wild. It shows how much our expectations really affect what we see.
Totally. It's almost like our brains just want to believe.
Yeah. They fill in the blanks, with what we want to see, even if it's not really there.
And that's where pareidolia comes in, right?
Exactly.
Tell me more about that.
It's basically our brain's habit of finding patterns, even when the patterns aren't real. Like when we see faces in the clouds or like animals in random shapes.
Oh, right. Yeah, I get it. So pareidolia, it could be why someone thinks they see Nessie in a photo, even if it's just a log or something?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Our brains, they're just trying to make sense of the world. And sometimes they see things that aren't there just because that's what we're expecting to see.
Right. Our brains are just trying to help us out, even if they're a little confused. So are we saying that every Nessie sighting is just a mistake? It's just people seeing things?
Well, it's not quite that simple. Even though a lot of sightings can be explained by people mixing things up or the weather or even, how our brains work, there are still some things in Loch Ness that are unexplained.
Oh, really? Like what?
Like, remember those sonar readings we were talking about before?
Yeah, right.
The ones that couldn't just be explained away as boat wakes or debris?
Yeah.
There are a lot of readings like that. And they've been puzzling researchers for a long time.
Right.
And then there are all those historical accounts of people seeing strange things in Loch Ness. Some of them go way back, hundreds of years. And while, some stories probably get exaggerated, it's hard to believe that every single one is just made up.
It's like that puzzle we were talking about before. We're still missing some pieces.
Yeah, that's a great way to put it. And each new piece of information we get, whether it's a sonar reading or a story from long ago or a new study, it just adds to the mystery.
So even with all the technology and the research, there's still this element of wonder about Loch Ness.
Absolutely. And that wonder, that's what keeps people coming back. They're drawn to the possibility of something unknown, something exciting hiding in the water, just waiting to be found.
It's a good reminder that even in our world, there are still places to explore, like real frontiers.
I love that. Yeah, and who knows? Maybe one day we'll finally figure out the truth about the Loch Ness Monster. But until then, the search is part of the fun.
It's about being curious, respecting the history and always asking questions. Because that's what keeps us interested and engaged.
You're so right. That's what makes this topic so interesting, right? It makes you think critically, question things, and just be open to the possibility that there's more to the world than we can see.
Right. Because sometimes the world feels so, defined.
Right.
Like everything's already been figured out. But there's still so much we don't know.
So much. And that's a good thing to remember. So as we keep looking into this legend, let's try to keep an open mind. Enjoy the mystery.
Yeah.
And, just enjoy the journey.
I love that. Well said. All right, so let's switch gears a bit. Let's talk about the impact the Loch Ness Monster has had on culture. Because it's more than just a creature, right? It's become this global icon.
Oh, totally. It's gone way beyond just local legend. It's this worldwide phenomenon, this symbol of mystery and adventure and the power of these old stories that people have been telling for centuries.
It's true. And it's had a huge impact on the local economy, too. I mean, tourism in the area is booming thanks to Nessie.
Oh, yeah. People come from all over just hoping to see it.
And it's amazing how one legend can really shape a whole region's identity. Nessie is synonymous with Loch Ness now. And that image of the monster, it's everywhere. On postcards, souvenirs, even the businesses around the loch.
Yeah.
It's become the unofficial mascot of Loch Ness. And that cultural influence, it goes way beyond tourism. Nessie has been the inspiration for all sorts of things. Art, literature, music, even movies.
Oh, absolutely. You have
Yeah.
everything from classic films like The Private Life of Sherlock Holmes
Mm.
to documentaries, books, even video games. It's really incredible.
I know. It's amazing how one legend can impact culture in so many ways. And it shows how powerful stories can be, especially the ones that make us think about the unknown, the things we haven't figured out yet.
Yeah. And the Loch Ness Monster, it's this reminder that stories can bring people together, inspire them, connect them to something bigger than themselves.
Yeah.
It's kind of beautiful when you think about it.
It is. And as we continue to explore the depths of Loch Ness, literally and figuratively, right? It's so important to think about how important this legend is to people.
Absolutely.
It's this story that has captured the imagination of the whole world, and its impact is going to be felt for a long time. It's been quite a journey today, exploring all the ins and outs of the Loch Ness Monster mystery.
It really has. We've covered so much ground.
From sonar readings to scientific theories, even those hoaxes and how our minds can play tricks on us.
It's amazing how Loch Ness just keeps capturing people's imagination. It's more than just a lake, you know? It's a symbol of mystery, of those things we don't know and maybe can't ever fully explain.
You know, it's funny. The Loch Ness Monster is almost like one of those, what are they called? Rorschach tests, where what you see says something about you.
That's a really interesting way to put it. What people see in Nessie often reflects their own beliefs about the world.
Right. Like some people see it as this creature from the past, a dinosaur that somehow survived when all the others died out. And then others, they think it's this giant eel, like something out of a myth or a fairy tale.
Yeah, and others just see it as proof that there's still so much about the world that we just don't understand.
Yeah.
Like, science can't explain everything.
It's wild how one legend can lead to so many different interpretations. And I think that's part of what keeps people coming back to it. You've got the scientists and the believers and everyone in between.
I think you're right. It's a story that brings people together, even if they don't agree on what it means.
But, beyond just the mystery and the stories, I think there's a deeper lesson here. Something about how important it is to think critically about the world around us.
Absolutely. For years, people have based their belief in the Loch Ness Monster on, things like eyewitness accounts, blurry photos, and sonar readings that are hard to interpret. But we've seen how those things can be really unreliable, right?
Right.
Our perceptions can be influenced by so many things. What we expect to see, even hoaxes and trickery.
It's a good reminder to always question what we see and what we hear, especially when it comes to something as crazy as, a monster hiding in a lake.
Exactly. And that's where critical thinking comes in. It's about stepping back and looking at the evidence without jumping to conclusions. Thinking about different possibilities, weighing the facts, and then forming your own opinion.
It's like being a detective, right? Trying to separate the truth from the lies.
That's a great analogy.
Yeah.
And that skill, being able to think critically and figure out what's real and what's not, is so important in today's world, especially with all the information flying around from so many different sources.
It can be really hard to sort through it all, to know what to believe. It's almost like a minefield of information out there.
It really is. And I think the whole Loch Ness Monster story, with all the hoaxes and misunderstandings and the genuine scientific efforts to figure things out, it shows us why critical thinking is so important. It reminds us to be skeptical, but not closed-minded, to be curious, but not gullible, and to always keep learning and asking questions, even when the answers are hard to find.
It's about the journey, right? The search for knowledge is just as important as finding a definitive answer.
I think so. And even if we never find out for sure if Nessie is real or not, the fact that people have been searching for so long tells us something about human nature,
Yeah. It shows how curious we are, how much we want to understand the world around us.
Exactly. So, as we wrap up our deep dive into the Loch Ness Monster mystery, here's what we want you to take away. Stay curious, but don't be afraid to look at the science. Question what you think you know, but don't rule out the possibility of the unknown. Who knows, maybe one day we'll have enough evidence to solve the riddle of Loch Ness. But until then, the legend lives on.
It definitely does. And it reminds us of the power of our imagination, the thrill of exploring the unknown, and the importance of never stopping asking questions. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive. Remember, sometimes the most exciting discoveries are made on the journey, not just at the destination.